Welcome into 5-Wide Fantasy. Today we're getting some running back rankings for Week 14, going through basically every single matchup, giving you my top 30 players at the position this week, helping you set those fantasy lineups. If you guys enjoyed today's video, would appreciate if you did hit that like button for me. Let me know that you're enjoying this content. I should keep getting it to you. And as well, if you are new, hit that subscribe button. We're getting fantasy content out to you every single day to help you win those fantasy championships. It's the last week of the regular season. It's time to buckle down and find those guys you can start and win your league. I have a league. I was actually just showing some of the guys in the office that 7-6 is in second place and also in 7th place. And I am 7-6 right now in this league. So I desperately need this win so that I get my playoff spot. So we'll be making sure we make the best lineup decisions we can. Let's jump into my running back rankings for this week. First up, as he is every week that he's starting, Christian McCaffrey getting the Seattle defense again after having a week in between. Seattle, a team that you can definitely run the ball against. They're 27th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position this year and also 19th in EPA against the run. A team that's definitely taken a lot of steps back since the beginning of the season, and it's really no different here for McCaffrey. 2, Saquon Barkley. I think a lot of people have Barkley far too low in their rankings. When you look at the opportunity and the volume that this guy gets with Tommy DeVito at quarterback, we're seeing 20, 25, 30 touches a game if this game script is right for Barkley. And Green Bay is a good team to be able to run the ball on. Barkley should be able to do things efficiently. They're 28th in EPA against the run. They're 24th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Love Barkley this week because, again, volume will be high. If the Giants can stay in this game, even if they don't, we know what he can do in the receiving games he's done week after week after week. So love him this week. 3, Alvin Kamara. Kamara getting that Carolina defense. Carolina is second to last in fantasy points allowed to running backs. They've somewhat improved. They're definitely not in the upper half, but they're probably 31st is not where I'd have them ranked now. They're a little bit better than what they've been early in the season when they were just absolutely terrible, but they're still 29th in EP against the run, 29th in run defense grade from PFF. So definitely feel good about Kamara, especially if you're going to have potentially Jameis Winston at quarterback. This team's going to want to do a good job protecting the ball, and that could lead to Kamara getting a ton of volume. 4, Zach Moss. Moss gets the Cincinnati defense, and Cincinnati has been pretty susceptible to the run. We didn't see it last week against Jacksonville with Travis Etienne not really being completely healthy, but I do think this is a team you can run the ball effectively against. They're dead last in EPA against the run. They're 21st in fantasy points allowed. With Jonathan Taylor out of the picture, Moss gets such a nice workload that it's very beneficial to be starting him, and of course, that's the case with him being my RB4 on the week. 5, Austin Eckler. If there is ever going to be a time for Austin Eckler to stop running the ball like Helen Keller and just running into the back of his offensive line, it's here. It's Denver. Denver has been absolutely brutal. I think they are the worst run defense in the entire league. They're dead last in fantasy points allowed to the position. Eckler has been brutal the last few weeks. I think this is the chance to find a big week from him, and a player that has been killing you lately, but if you need a win this week, he's the guy that's going to be able to help you do so. I think you're in for a big week for Eckler and the Chargers finally being able to run the ball effectively, which they have not been able to do for a number of weeks. We saw it last week against New England, but New England's the number 1 defense in EPA against the run, so I think we see a huge change here for the run game. 6, Bijan Robinson. Certainly not a really exciting matchup, but the Bucs are really banged up, and we saw Chuba Hubbard run for over 100 yards in the game last week against Tampa. Feel good about Bijan here, even with the difficult matchup, because yes, Tampa is a top 10 run defense, top 10 in EPA, top 10 in EPA against the run, and top 10 in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. 7, Josh Jacobs. Don't love the matchup. Minnesota's a good run defense, 5th in EPA, 4th in fantasy points allowed to the position, but Jacobs' volume is just the thing that you need to pay attention to. Trailing game script, positive game script, he's going to get the ball a ton, so still feel great about him this week. 8, Isaiah Pacheco. With the injury to Jerick McKinnon, it's really helped Pacheco out quite a bit. Buffalo, bottom half in terms of run defense, when you look at it from 19th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Pacheco's a huge part of this offense and kind of moving forward, going to be a top 12 guy. 9, David Montgomery. As much as you might think Jahmyr Gibbs is the better running back, is the better player, Montgomery is the guy to go to when this team is looking to score touchdowns, and he's the guy that's getting more rushing volume. Chicago, pretty good run defense. They're actually they're 10th in EPA, 8th in fantasy points allowed to the position. Sorry, this is wrong. This is the Lions. Chicago, I know, they're not quite they're definitely not a top 10 team in fantasy points allowed, but they are a top 4. I think they're 4th or 5th in EPA against the run. Sorry, I have my numbers wrong here and have them flipped. So I do like what we're going to be able to get from Montgomery in terms of touchdown opportunities. I don't think they'll run the ball all that efficiently between the two of them, so that's why I'm here closer to a back half RB1 than a front half. 10, Kyren Williams. Baltimore's defense, very tough. 5th in fantasy points allowed, 12th in EPA, 7th in run defense grade from PFF. But Kyren gets such valuable opportunities and gets such a significant amount of opportunities that it's really hard to put him outside the top 12 because the Rams have found a way to move the ball effectively against basically every defense. We saw it last week against the Browns, gave them some trouble. Williams had a good week as well, so feel good about him still being a top 12 back this week. 11 is Devon Achane. We're in a spot here with Achane where he was getting the larger amount of opportunity in their game last week against the Commanders, had more rushing attempts, is more involved in the receiving game because that's really what his MO was coming out of college, was a great receiver. So feel great about him in this matchup. Tennessee's a tough defense. I mean, I think they're a pretty solid unit. They're 7th in EPA against the run, but more middle of the road in fantasy points allowed. The Dolphins have found ways to be effective offensively in the ground game against just about anybody. So feel good about him going into this week. And then rounding out the top 12 will be Javonte Williams. Player I'm a little bit higher on, I think, than what consensus is, but the Chargers defense played well in the last couple of weeks, but still don't think they're a very legitimate unit. So I do think Williams will have some opportunities to score touchdowns and run the ball decently effectively. The Chargers are 20th in fantasy points allowed to the position. Moving into my RB2s, Rachaad White. White getting that Atlanta defense, and the Atlanta defense has been very, very good against the run. They're 3rd in fantasy points, 3rd in EPA, the number 1 defense and run defense grade from PFF as well. So I think it's a difficult matchup, but White has found ways to be effective and be efficient, but be effective for you in fantasy, regardless of the matchup. And he's one of those few players, like a Saquon Barkley is, like a Josh Jacobs is, like Zach Moss's role is right now, where there just isn't another guy coming onto the field and taking away his touches, his snaps, his opportunities. So even in bad matchups right now, this is where I'd have White as like a front-end RB2. 14, Jahmyr Gibbs. Look, both Montgomery and Gibbs are going to split some opportunities. Gibbs is going to be more valuable in the receiving game, and I think that's where you're going to see him. The reason I have him as a near RB1 of the week is because the bump you get against the Bears defense, who don't give up a lot on the ground, but do give up a fair bit in from the receiving game to running back. So look for Gibbs to be effective there. 15, Travis Etienne, getting the Cleveland defense. Cleveland, a very good defense all around, 2nd in fantasy points allowed to the position, 2nd in EPA, but they are more middle of the road, 15th in fantasy points allowed to the position. Etienne's a little banged up. I want to see how his week goes in terms of practice. Is he practicing every day? Is he healthy? Because he just seems a little bit banged up, and that's going to put an effect for me in terms of elevating him into the top 12, because we saw Dearness Johnson on the field for a good amount of opportunities that took away from Travis Etienne being able to be a top 12 guy on the week. 16, Breece Hall. This is a Jets offense that I don't know what they're doing at quarterback. I would assume it's going to be Simeon this week. I don't think it's going to be Zach Wilson, because apparently Zach Wilson does not want to play. Houston, pretty middle of the road in terms of defense right now, 17th in fantasy points allowed, 15th in EPA. So not really a matchup that sticks out too much. And for Hall, volume is going to be good here. So I like kind of where I have him as a middle of the road back this week. 17, Derrick Henry. Tough matchup, Miami. I definitely think this is a pretty good unit. 11th in fantasy points allowed, 5th in run defense grade from PFF. Can the Titans move the ball effectively? And are they going to be in a script where also can they run the football? Because, they're a 13-point underdog on the road on Monday night. I'm a little bit worried about Henry's volume in this game. Look, if they're going to get into opportunities to score touchdowns, Henry's going to be the guy to benefit from that. But again, the matchup is a bit of a concern. 18, Tony Pollard. I think the Eagles' run defense is starting to be a little bit, I'm not going to say fraudulent, but I think a bit overhyped. It doesn't look to be playing as well as it was early in the season. We've seen a few teams run the ball pretty effectively against them, namely the Chiefs and last week with the 49ers, obviously. So it doesn't put a huge, I think if I felt the way I felt about the Eagles' run defense a few weeks or like a month ago, Pollard might be like more of like an RB3 on the week, honestly, because again, it has been a bad year for Tony Pollard, and I'm just not sure if he'll score in this game. But with the way I'm feeling about the Eagles' defense right now, I still feel Pollard is going to be a decent start for you. I'm just not quite as high on him as some others might be, just because again, I do still think the teams aren't looking to run the ball too much against the Eagles, because the pass defense is where there's the major weakness. 19, Joe Mixon. The matchup is pretty solid. Like the Colts are 29th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position, but I did see Chase Brown getting on the field. Is that going to continue? Is that going to have an impact on Mixon and his overall fantasy performance? How many points are we going to see in this game? Am I going to see Jake Browning continue to be the player that he was last week? We shall see. Browning wasn't too effective, in terms of downfield passing plays. A lot of it came behind the line of scrimmage or, between 0 to 9 yards down the field. So we'll see what the effectiveness is. The receptions that the Jaguars allowed definitely helped Mixon in a big way last week. So I'm not particularly too high on Mixon, but again, he's still like an RB2 for me. Definitely someone I want to start. 20, A.J. Dillon. Pretty good matchup here with the Giants. 28th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. 24th in EPA against the run. So for Dillon in the RB1 role with the Packers, definitely something that's pretty valuable. The team is throwing the ball quite a bit in the red zone, which does put a bit of a damper on Dillon in terms of having that higher ceiling, but floor is really solid for him here, so that's why I've got him here as an RB2. 21, Alexander Mattison. We saw him reclaim his role as the top option for this Vikings offense with a pretty good performance before their bye week against the Bears. So I do feel like Madison will continue to have that top role, will continue to be the number one guy, and Las Vegas is a good matchup. So I do think you should start him. 26th in fantasy points allowed, 23rd in EPA against the run. Definitely a spot here where I think Madison continues to be effective on the ground. 22, Ezekiel Elliott. We're going to have no Ramondre Stevenson for the next couple of weeks, so you benefit with Zeke getting him as an RB1 in this offense. It is the Patriots offense, though. The Steelers are a pretty decent matchup. 22nd in fantasy points allowed to running backs. I think Zeke is going to obviously benefit from the fact that he's a capable receiver. He's going to get all the rushing opportunities. You're going to see maybe Ty Montgomery for a couple of snaps, but this is Zeke's backfield, so expect to see, 17 to 19 touches in this game, which for him with this offense puts him at an okay floor. Just, again, finding the end zone might be tough because who knows how many points we're going to get in this game on Thursday night with like the total at 30. 23, Gus Edwards. Tough matchup. The Rams have been really good against the run all season. 7th in fantasy points allowed, 9th in run defense grade from PFF. So for Edwards, I think he's really reliant on the potential of scoring touchdowns, and making that like super predictable in this game is a bit tough for me. And that's why I've got to put him more as the back at RB2, because I think the floor is like 3 fantasy points and the ceiling could be he finds the end zone twice and he gets you 18, 19 points. But for Edwards, it's really a guessing game, so I don't want to put a ton of confidence in playing him. Rounding out the top 24, Raheem Mostert getting the Titans defense. We talked about Achane getting the number one role in this offense. Still think Mostert will get plenty of touches, especially as 13-point favorites in this game. So he is a startable asset. He's just not someone right now that I'm as high on, because I do think we're seeing Achane take over as the top option. Okay, now to our flex options this week. James Conner, he comes in by RB 25, getting the Kansas City defense, which has been pretty serviceable in terms of fantasy points allowed, but they're not very effective when it comes to just stopping the run on a down-to-down basis. 26th in EPA against the run. Cook's the top option here. How much are we going to see the run game? Last time that these two teams met up, the Bills were just super pass happy last season in this game. Does that continue? Is this a back and forth game? There should be some scoring opportunities, but that tends to go to Latavius Murray, so it's a little bit of a concern for me. We'll see what happens here with Cook. Still think you can play him with his effectiveness in the receiving game and his efficiency when he is running the ball. And like I said, the Chiefs aren't a super good run defense. They just been in a lot of scripts where teams haven't run the ball against them very much. 26, DeAndre Swift. Look, I think there's a good chance we see Kenny Gainwell in this game. I'm not sure DeAndre Swift will be available for this one with the potential of a concussion. But look, I'm done putting the Eagles running backs into my top 20. And in this matchup with the Dallas defense, is definitely not a good one. 6th in fantasy points allowed, 6th in EPA against the run. It's just Jalen Hurts stealing those touchdowns. And that's why the Eagles running backs were valuable last season, is for touchdown opportunities. And we're not getting them here. So for Swift, he's going to be able to get some touches in this game. He's going to see, 13 to 16 touches. And it's a good offense and a good offensive line that he could run the ball effectively. Got a tough defense. We're struggling to find these touchdown opportunities. So this is where I'm going to have him this week. 27, Najee Harris. New England's run defense is the number one defense in EPA against the run this season. So it is a tough matchup. It's a game that's not going to have a lot of points. Harris is the top dog here in terms of touches. So I do still think he's startable. I just, again, don't see the ceiling being very high for him. 28, Chuba Hubbard. Hubbard had a significant amount of touches for the Panthers last week. And I think that's a little bit telling, because now that Frank Reich is out, their offensive coordinator is back to calling plays, and the personnel decisions might change. So we might see Chuba Hubbard just be the top dog and be the number one option in this offense, and Miles Sanders takes a significant back seat. So that's something to pay attention to. New Orleans has been pretty middle of the road. Early in the season, they were really good against the run. Now they've taken a little bit of a step back. So still feel it as a tough matchup. And for the Panthers, a team that just struggles to put points on the board and move the football. So that's why I have Chuba as a bit more of the flex option as opposed to a confident start. 29, Zach Charbonnet. I don't think Kenneth Walker will be back this week. I think maybe next week he's back. Charbonnet gets the San Francisco defense. Very tough. 2nd in fantasy points allowed to running backs. We saw what Charbonnet did in this matchup a couple weeks ago against the Niners. Put up an absolute dud of a week. Last week, though, found a bit more effectiveness. The Seattle offense looked a lot more effective. So still think Charbonnet can be a start for you, just a fair bit riskier, and could see his floor drop out. 30, Jerome Ford. Jacksonville. Going to give up those receptions to running backs, the most in the league, the most receiving yards in the league. So that does get me to just inch Ford into my top 30. But Jacksonville's consistently been a really good run defense, 9th in fantasy points allowed to the position as well. So giving up one of the lowest yards per carry in the league too. Feel like it's a tough matchup. How many points are the Browns going to put up? And they'll probably lean on the pass game quite a bit in this one. So that has me a little bit more hesitant to play for here. Okay, now to some players that made it outside that are outside of my top 30, and I'm not going to be starting this week, and just have some worries about Latavius Murray, potential for touchdowns, but there's just too much risk there to be playing him. Guys like Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary, I find outside my top 30. Just think that the Jets are a team that can take away a lot of scoring opportunities from you. Such a good defense. The run defense has definitely been the part that's been a little bit worse for them, but Dameon Pierce is getting the ball far too much, and he's not running the ball effectively, so it's eating into the opportunity for Devin Singletary, and if this team is going to score any touchdowns, Pierce will be the beneficiary, so he's my RB 31, where Singletary's my RB 35, and then a guy like Jalen Warren, again, matchup I think is tough here. Points will not be very easy to find, and then I saw Najee Harris running a few more routes than Warren too, on top of having more carries. That's going to be a bit of a concern for Warren moving forward. And Keaton Mitchell, just a risky play, could really explode, but just touches haven't quite been there enough. He's not going to get, the carries inside the opponent 20-yard line. Those are going to go to Gus Edwards. So those are some reasons for concern, and in the tough matchup that I mentioned with the Rams. If there's any players that I missed or didn't talk about, definitely feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. I'll tell you how I feel about them, but again, would probably be telling you not to start them this week in fantasy football. Those are the top 30 I have at the position to help you set your fantasy lineups heading into week 14. Again, guys, if you enjoyed today's video, do hit that like button for me. Would greatly appreciate it. And thank you guys so much for watching. We will see you on the next one.